Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back Jonathan Edwards.
Hello again, and alongside me, Simon Longstaff, who is the director of the St James's Ethics Centre, and a real-life philosopher. I'm not sure we've had a philosopher on stage before. A bit of novelty. We're going to talk about ethics in global sport, and frankly, this is the hottest topic, I would say, at this Doha Goals Forum this year. And before we have a little chat, Simon, a shout-out to the students at Amsterdam University who are watching online at the Sport and Law course. Give them a wave, everybody. Yep, okay, I hope you enjoy this. So, ethics in global sport. I guess before we can start talking about the philosophy behind ethics in sport, we have to almost define the subject, sport. What is it? What in essence is sport? Why does it grab our attention in the way that it does?
I think it's not just a matter of grabbing attention. I remember going to a poetry reading in the United States and talking about why people had gone there. And they said something extraordinary. They said, oh, that's where we go to hear the truth. And it made me think about sport because there's so much of what we encounter in our lives which is manufactured. It's marketing, it's spin, that there are very few times when you can find something which is authentic and real. And I think the attraction in sport goes well beyond anything to do with spectacle. It's the fact that there you see a contest which is an expression of truth, if you like, embodied truth, where you see people bringing their bodies, their spirit to bear in a legitimate contest. I think that's what really inspires people. And if you lose that, then all you're left with is spectacle. And there are plenty of ways you can find that by doing something else.
It's interesting you say that, because let's take, I was watching the Formula One at the weekend, and there's a lot of spectacle to that.
Yeah.
But it's not really a level playing field in a sense, is it? Because you've got all sorts of different sorts of investment. So sport isn't purely that, is it? It's not that sort of the essence of people competing against each other on a level playing field.
But it is at its best.
Okay.
And when people feel that they're seeing either an individual drawing from themselves in a contest which might only be against themselves or against other people, where they see courage and commitment, where they see them draw from reserves which might allow an underdog who is not fancied to win to actually prevail in the contest. That's what ignites the imagination. And if that is not true, if it's just a sham, then people will very quickly disengage because there are other things they can do to see things that explode or larger and amazing events. So that's why I think what we need to do is to take this question very seriously, because it's the essence of sport which is at risk if that component is lost.
What about, so that's the ethical basis of it, you would say. If you look at things from, let's say, an evolutionary point of view, survival of the fittest, and it's just about that pure desire to win, and that is what is at the essence of sport. Would you take that as a valid viewpoint?
I think the aspiration to win is undoubtedly true, and it motivates many people. But I also think there are countervailing forces which say you should not try to win at any cost. Even in something which is the most brutal competition that we can imagine, which is the waging of warfare, there's this observation made by the Canadian philosopher Michael Ignatieff that the difference between a warrior and a barbarian is ethical restraint. And if you have no restraint, no ethical restraint at all, and you secure your victory by important means, yes, there might be that moment of excitement at having prevailed, but I believe, having spoken to many people, that it soon loses its savour. People who cheat in order to win never truly enjoy the victory that they have secured, even if no one ever notices.
Do you really think that's true? I mean, it's very difficult to ask somebody who's cheated to win who will own up to it and then say what they feel about it. But is that something that we as sort of reasonable human beings assume or hope is the case?
I think it's more than a hope.
I mean,
you can talk to enough people who've been in those situations, and it's not just restricted to sport. There are plenty of other contests too, where it's not necessarily that survival's at stake. It's about some kind of gain that you get. And people will tell you where they reveal. I'm in a lucky enough position to have those conversations where people will tell you things which are not about, because I'm not there, I can't punish anyone, they're just talking. And they'll say that, yeah, I did this and that means, but it meant nothing to me ultimately because I knew that it wasn't a serious or proper victory.
You're coming not from the sporting world.
No, you can tell, can you?
No. How good do you think sport is at having the intellectual conversation about ethics and then interpreting it in terms of its rules and regulations?
Well, there's two things about that. I think it's getting better. For me, a lot of work that I do with sport is directed towards the players because I think they're the ones on the field and they have to be the stewards for their game. Whatever the code, whatever the sport, they've got to own that. The rules are an attempt to try and provide some kind of framework around this, but I'm concerned that at the moment we are thinking that we can fix all of the problems in sport by regulation and surveillance. Now, we do need to have some rules. We'll all get on aeroplanes a little bit later this week and none of us wants the pilot to say, let's forget about the checklist and just go for a bit of a fly. We want them to understand the constraints within which they work. But you need something more, because if you create a system in which no one can choose to do anything wrong, then it's a world in which no one can choose to do anything right. You simply comply. You lose that capacity to make responsible decisions. You outsource your judgment to other people. So what I'd like to see is a move to something a bit different, which is instead of simply aiming to catch and punish people who've done the wrong thing, which is what is sensationalised, which causes all things, why don't we look at investing at least the same resources in actually identifying and celebrating the people who do the right thing, those people who bring an ethical core to the way that they engage in their competition. And we've all seen them. Golf is famous for this, where you might have a person who reports themselves to the tournament referee because they've broken one of its arcane rules. No one's seen it, no one noticed, and they may actually lose. That's the kind of thing. We ought to have a global award, a really, really prestigious thing. It's something that might come out of this forum, actually, which suggests you identify those people and you hold them up as role models, because I think they then become the exemplars for the many things that we heard yesterday and we most admire about what sport can do.
We will pick up on that with the rest of the panel, which I'm going to introduce now. Put your hands together for Jackie JOYNER-KERSEE, 3 times Olympic champion, still the world record holder in the heptathlon, and basically a superstar. Jackie. So Craig REEDIE, who's the Vice President of the International Olympic Committee and the President of the World Anti-Doping Association, and a great friend. And Claudio SULSER, who's the former Chairman of the FIFA Ethics Committee and also the Chairman of the Disciplinary Committee now. You are very welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Craig, let me start with you. So what do you think about this idea? You're listening to Simon there about, you've got the kind of the stick and the carrot, haven't you?
Yeah, well, 2 immediate comments. One is that the World Anti-Doping Agency and the IOC have moved away a little bit from describing the drug problem as the fight against doping in sport to a philosophy of protecting the clean athlete. And I think that does work. And it's been picked up by WADA, it's been picked up by the IOC, and we'll be interested over the next few months and years to see that it's picked up by all the athletes. And I was intrigued with the suggestion about let's praise the voluntary action of an athlete. Many years ago, I managed to walk behind a very old man called Roger Wethered at Royal Wimbledon Golf Club in London. And now this is the man who called a penalty shot on himself as an amateur and lost the 1924 Open Golf Championship by 1 shot. Now, it's a long time ago, but it's about as good an example as I can give you.
Jackie, again, picking up on Simon's comments about the lack of ultimate satisfaction of doing something when you know you've cheated but nobody else does. Is that something that you think is true or you hope would be true? I mean, having achieved what you've achieved through your career, what would your view be on that?
I'm not really sure if it's true or not, because it relies with the individual, because it's something that consciously you have to deal with. And if you're not comfortable with knowing that you put in all the hard work and you decide to take the shortcut, then somewhere down the road that's something that you're dealing with, and it probably would eat at you all the time.
Just coming back to you on this, Simon. I mean, Lance Armstrong, let's take cycling, for example, perhaps the most famous recent case. I mean, Lance's view would have been, well, they were all doing it, so it was fine.
Yeah,
frankly.
That is his view, I think. And that sounds to me like a rationalisation, certainly from a philosophical perspective. The fact that lots of people do something or that everybody does it is about one of the worst reasons you can ever have for doing something. It opens the door to minor things, but to truly horrible things that have been done from time to time. What you want to do for somebody like Lance Armstrong is to make sure that the balance of approaches to fair competition is such that he doesn't have the belief that everybody's doing it and doing it with impunity, and that feels that it is an actual fair situation, and therefore the temptation or the justification is removed.
I think it's interesting. I mean, and again, I'll get your view on this, Jackie. The drug problem in athletics wasn't something which, it does bother me, don't get me wrong, but because I held the world record, it wasn't as if, and you hold the world record, it wasn't as if there was somebody there who was better than me and I kind of knew was cheating, so it kind of ate away at me inside. If it had been a different way around, I think I'd had a very different perspective on it, and I guess you would be the same.
Yes, and it bothers me from the standpoint that I'm glad that the IOC and WADA is looking at it from protecting the athletes that have done it right, that have put in the work. And I know in athletics is that every time someone, even during my time when we performed, there was always question. And even today, you still hear that. And it kind of bothers me for the athletes that continue to work hard and no one is stepping up and speaking for them. There's always a whisper, and it isn't fair.
Absolutely. Going to come to you now, Claudio. Claudio is going to speak in French, so if you want to put your translation on the French, it's in your language, and hopefully I can get mine to work. I don't know what channel it's on. I don't even know.
Claudio, Simon,
and Craig touched on it, would call themselves for a minor infringement which had no effect on the result. I think it's fair to say that your sport of football is not one of those sports.
Can you repeat the question? Because
I'm talking about sports and the culture within those sports, and the ethics of the players.
Okay.
And I think, bluntly, what we see in football is perhaps not what we see in golf, or maybe sometimes in snooker, where a player will just touch the ball and they'll self-call for a foul. There seems to be an active culture of trying, bluntly, to cheat. And you sit on the disciplinary committee. It's something, obviously, which is of great concern to you.
Okay. Merci pour la question. Bonjour à tout le monde.
thank you for the question. In the world of football, there is a culture which is different from the other sports. Compared to other sports like rugby, where you have a lot of contact, there are many simulations and there are many cheating activities during the game. There is this problem that make the footballers cheat sometimes from time to time, but we have to intervene by educating the players and also by imposing some sanctions on some players.
Claudio suggests it's an issue of education, but I'm going to go back to my question, survival of the fittest versus doing what's right. The money involved is so huge. Is there an inherent conflict between ethics and money, most obviously seen in football?
Oh, well, there can be clearly a conflict, and we see that in betting scandals and a whole lot of things. But even if you weren't to appeal on the grounds of some kind of ethical commitment, you might want to talk to people in this situation on the grounds of self-interest. That there can come a point where crowds of people still thinking that the level of skill is extraordinary and with their tribal allegiances, if any kind of ethical foundation breaks down to the point where you just do whatever it takes, including blatant cheating, beyond the kind of theatricalities that you see in football, the crowds will melt away. Eventually they will find something which is more authentic, which will engage them. And it may even be that it's within the same code, but a different level. So I was recently in the United Kingdom, where I was talking to a number of people who are less inclined now to go to Premier League matches because of the cost of it, because of what they see, a whole range of things. And they're rediscovering the game of football, but at lower levels in other parts of the league. So I may be wrong. It might be that people stick to this forever, that they're completely indifferent. But if I was a betting person, I'd say there's not very much point in being the world's best dinosaur when everything is about to favour the mammals. And some of these games can reach a tipping point where suddenly they lose the credibility that they rely upon.
But to be fair, football seems to be bucking this trend pretty well.
Look, it is at the moment, and lots of things are going very well, but you just don't know when you get to the point where the credibility... Think of what's happened to cycling. How precarious has cycling been because of the doping issues? Now, there was a sport which was revered, where people would sit up all night in my country and watch it, and it gets to the point where if you don't correct it, and you think it impossible, suddenly all is lost.
Yeah, I mean, that's one factor that people have to remember. If you cheat in sport, particularly at the top end, you can impose huge damage on your sport. And cycling has been damaged very seriously as a sport. However, it's really only one part of cycling. Jonathan, as you know from our part of the world in Britain, the Olympic success of winning medals on the track, not on the road, has actually changed the whole sporting picture in the United Kingdom. Everybody now cycles. Even I cycle. But this gentleman up here and the peloton, and he said, everybody's doing it, why not me, did huge damage to the sport of cycling, to such an extent that the sport itself has to put together an absolutely independent commission to look at what was happening. And I think cycling deserves great credit for that effort and look forward hugely to the result of the exercise.
Let's move on to some recent research from Norwegian scientists. And of course, ethics and the rules and regulations that we have to reflect advances in science. And Craig, with your hat on as president of WADA, this research showed that potentially that people who take drugs can have a benefit for many years afterwards, even when they've stopped taking drugs. And I guess this must be something that you're looking at seriously in terms of the bans that you give to athletes.
Yes, there is scientific work being done and funded by WADA. I'm sure you're referring to the work that's just been announced from Oslo,
yeah.
Where the experiment is on mice, not on men or women. It may take longer to prove, but sanctions have been a real issue. The world got used to the idea that a serious doping offence involved a 2-year sanction. Public opinion then developed and said that we didn't think that 2 years was enough. The IOC led the way on that. The British Olympic Association led the way on that when people said we need longer sanctions. And the world really began to believe, and the athletes of the world pushed us to move up to a figure of 4 years. Now, there is a legal presumption that any sanction should be proportionate to the offence. And at the moment, very senior legal advice indicates that a 4-year sanction is about right for a serious doping offence. That suits the IOC because it will effectively take the athlete out of the next games. It will be interesting to see whether public opinion changes. And if it does, then certainly we will look at it. But the worst situation of all would, for any regulator, would be to put in place a sanction which was immediately lost in a court of law.
But sometimes you just have to stand up for what's right and try and fight your corner, I would say. talking about 4-year bans, and it brings us on to a very specific case, which I think opens up a broader discussion. Justin Gatlin served a 4-year ban, Jackie. He's come back, and his crime seems to be doing well, as much as anything. People accept, okay, people, will come back, but he's been running brilliantly and has been getting a lot of flack, frankly, and people didn't want him on the shortlist for the athlete of the year. But surely part of ethics in sport is redemption and a second chance.
I believe in second chances, and I fully understand that the crime should fit the punishment, and I feel that Justin Gatlin has paid his dues. He paid the price, whatever the sanction was at that time that everyone had agreed to. But now that because people are upset, even from him coming back, bouncing back, and doing extremely well, for whatever reason, they do not want to welcome him back. But he's still performing, and so it's a tough fight. It's a no-win situation, because if you side with Justin or you wrong, if you disagree with him, disagree with what's happening. So I think that as an organization, as we continue to move forward, that we pull all parties involved, from the athletes, the IOC, the WADA, and everyone. Whatever you come up with, you stick to it. And if the rule says that after you have served your time, then give the person a chance.
Simon, would you agree that second chance is an important part of this ethical discussion?
Yeah, absolutely. We generally accept that when a person has paid the price, the penalty imposed, they should be then able to resume their lives. The tragic possibility here is that a man who is a gifted athlete may very well have reached the kind of performance he's achieving today without any of this intervention in the past, but earlier. And he would have been able to enjoy those successes with the support of his peers within the sport without any cynicism amongst the wider public. So if, as was alleged, he did those things and he's paid his price, he has sacrificed already a tremendous amount for no good purpose.
Indeed. Any questions? We're going to come out. I'm sure there will be loads of questions to our panel because it's a fascinating discussion. I'll come to you in a couple of minutes, but just be thinking about your questions. I want to move on to a different subject now, which I apologise in advance. I haven't forewarned you of. I'm going to start with you, Claudio, because you're a legal man. Sport is broadly self-regulating, and that independence is something that I think it guards fiercely. But are we at such a state now? And we're not just talking about doping here, we're talking about illegal betting, money laundering, serious crime, where criminalisation for offences is something, and much more cooperation with government, with the authorities, is absolutely necessary to save sport.
Oui, je pense que c'est important que
ايش تعملك؟ إذا تكلمنا على الفيفا من خلال الأقسام for FIFA, it's very important to impose regulations that take into account the reports of the investigators and also the liaison with the governments. And as an organization, FIFA as an organization, it's very important that we found this sort of partnership between investigators and the governments. We have to send a positive message, which is based on the idea that a triumph based on cheating is not a victory. So there must be people, we must build a culture whereby people can accept defeat. If I contemplate on my career, I would say that there are winners and there are losers, and this is our objective for the time being.
WADA, criminalisation for athletes, doping potential? No?
Well, certainly don't criminalise athletes. There's a very clear feeling in the IOC and in WADA that sport should sanction sports people. What sport would like to see is greater assistance from the public authorities. And in fact, WADA is a very good example of how it can work when we're a completely hybrid organisation of 50% sport and 50% public authorities. What we really need the authorities to do is to criminalise those people who import and distribute performance-enhancing substances. I think it's only yesterday that United Nations made a decision in response to a claim by Thomas Bach, our IOC president, that sport should be autonomous, but it needs to work closely with public authorities. And I think you can make that distinction. It may be more difficult to do in other areas of cheating. It may be more difficult to do on the issue of match fixing. I think there is a general view that doping in sport is not a good idea. Many governments have signed up to the appropriate declarations. Many governments have ratified the UNESCO Convention. The sad thing is that not enough of them implement it. We need legislation, we need regulations in countries which stop the importation of the substances which are causing the problem. It's a big ask, but we better keep asking it.
Very quickly from you, Jackie, and you, Simon, on the criminalisation, on a specific issue for doping, the ultimate stick?
Criminalize?
So that's a no from Jackie, I think we'll take. Simon?
Like Craig, I would not criminalise the athlete, I would criminalise those who purvey it. And I'd also put into this frame that the athletes often bear an unknown cost to their own bodies and their long-term health by some of the substances which they're urged to take.
Questions, and there will be questions on this. I'm going to come over to this side here. There's a gentleman in the middle there with a kind of Norwegian-type top on, if I can call it that. Can I call it that?
Hello,
Go.
Hugo from France. I've got a question for Mr. Sulser. So a bit polemical maybe. So you said earlier that...
You can speak French.
Yeah, you can speak French.
D'accord. Vous avez dit plutôt que...
You said earlier that there are many simulations in football and many footballers like to cheat. So do you think that the use of video and technology, the same way it is used in tennis, will put an end to simulations and cheating in football? Are you for the idea? Thank you very much for the question. The images of video and the use of technology can put an end to some simulations. And Sepp Blatter said that in case the referee doesn't see a foul or a simulation or a cheating activity, we might refer to technology. So in the disciplinary committee, we are discussing this issue, and we said that we will use video and technology only and only if the act has not been seen by the referee. So the use of camera, the use of technology will be taken into account after the end of the game, but not during the game, because we would love to keep football as it is. And if we're going to use technology, which means will mean that we will stop the game every now and then, and this will lead, of course, to boredom. This is not football. Yes, we believe in the benefit of video and technology, but after the end of the game.
In the middle there.
Hi, my name is John Paul from the United States. I'm interested in learning more about the perspective of the individual athlete. So I understand there are huge internal benefits of winning and being the best in your field. I can imagine there are also huge external pressures put on these athletes by coaches, leagues, and fans as well to kind of see them perform. Based on your conversations with athletes that have chosen to use performance-enhancing drugs, do you have a sense of how much of their decision was driven by internal motivation versus external forces?
You're asking?
Jackie?
Jackie?
Whoever.
Yeah, Jackie, I think you start on this one.
I haven't personally sat down and had that question opposed to someone, but from just listening, you know, we're talking about ethics and talking about the pressure of performing well versus the rewards in the end. Is it based off of monies? Then are those outside pressures from coaches? Or it could just be the individual, because sometimes individuals decide to do things that, you know, the coaches get blamed for, and the coaches has no idea of knowing that the athlete was doing something.
Well, I think a number of external pressures do play a role, particularly when you've got a large number of athletes who are quite young. They're still forming their own view. They can become very dependent on the relationships within a club or with a coach. And if that person sees their own success being realised through the athlete, they can sometimes cross the line in terms of what they're prepared to urge them to do, and they may not have the strength of character to say no.
Quickly, Simon.
The answer to the question is probably part of many of the examples that you gave. The World Anti-Doping Code does allow for reduced sanctions for what's called substantial assistance. And we have evidence of speaking to a number of people who did break the rules on dope and asked them why. And the answers that we get, some are personal, some are coach-led, some are pressure, peer group pressure. So you begin to build a picture of the different types of pressure. And it depends to a great extent on the kind of sport that you're in.
Indeed. I mean, I would add, I think that athletes, you know, you take it as read that they want to win and they're passionate about achieving, and they become very vulnerable, and they then trust people, and they don't necessarily ask questions. And there's a lot of stuff which is unsaid, it's tacit, and they can end up taking drugs almost without ever saying, I want to take drugs, by those people around them. Anyway, we have run out of time. We could go on and on and on. Please show your appreciation for our panel. They've been stunning. It's a coffee break now. There is a friendship tournament happening in the coffee break. You can play basketball with Mutumbo, if you can see him up there in the sky, and also Keju. So over there to your right, to my left, that's where the court is. It's on a first come, first served basis. Back here at 11 a.m. for the next session. Thank you very much indeed.